and welcome to this video. Today is apparently fuzzy purple sweatshirt day, and we are talking about picking a cab. So I got a comment on a video a few videos back, I think. I'll put a picture of the comment here. So thank you for submitting. The question was about how do I pick cabs? And I kind of hope that maybe I've talked about most of this, or at least alluded to most of what I'm going to talk about today in a lot of these 10-minute tones videos, because I kind of go through the same process and I start with the cab. So I think it's pretty important, but I'm going to go through a few principles today, and I've really sort of got 4 top-line principles that I'm going to go through. The first is use tradition to get yourself started, figure out where to get started. The second is to use your ears more than anything else. And I know I keep saying in every video, I haven't explained it yet, but I keep saying, if it sounds good, it is good. It's kind of my sign off. And that's basically what that means is trust your ears. You're playing music for it to be heard. If it doesn't sound good to you, it's not going to sound good to anyone else. So you have to start with that. Does it sound good to me? And then the third thing is you want to arm your ears with some knowledge. So yes, it's good to just listen and have a pure state of mind of like, does this sound good? What do I like about this? What do I don't like about this? But you have to be able to think critically about it too. It's a feedback cycle. Am I hearing too much bass? Am I hearing too much fizziness? Am I hearing too much mid-range, right? And you can think in general terms like that. So arm your ears with knowledge, and we'll do an exercise where we actually compare different IRs live, and we'll be able to see the frequency response. So that'll be a good exercise. And then the last thing is to be wary of your speakers. And so we'll go through each of those 4 things. I'll put chapter markers in the video, and hopefully you get something out of this. So the first thing is use tradition to get started. And what I mean by tradition is just like what people do in the real world, right? These amps are modeled on real amps that are usually paired with a particular cab or multiple speakers, or one speaker in it, some set of speakers that the amp designer thought matched well with that amp. And they want to put the best foot forward. So usually that's a great place to start. If you have no idea, like I've never used this amp before, that's the best place to start. And so for me, what I often do, and you've probably seen this in some of the 10-minute tones videos, is I go here for the fractal stuff, the amplifier models list. This is a community maintained, and so I think it's a little bit out of date at the moment, but you'll notice almost every section here for each amplifier calls out a cab or a type of cab or a genre of cab, right? Like here, with this Marshall, you probably want a 412, right? Greenback, okay? And so you can pretty much, if you're totally green, if you've never done this before, you can pretty much just search for that. So you can search for Marshall, or you can search for 4x12, or you can search for G12, right? And you'll see in the factory cabs, in the Fractal, hopefully you'll see some options that pop up just from those searches. So yeah, this is a great place to go to get started if you really have no idea what you're doing. Another good page here is the cabinet models list. If you just want to peruse and see what's there, you can obviously scroll through all of these in the unit, so it's not particularly important to know this page, but it is here, and it gives you a little bit more information about each of them. So that can be helpful if you're curious, like, well, what does USA Brown mean? Okay, here's some more information about that. It's brown face, right? We're not talking Van Halen tones, we're talking brown face tones. So yeah, that's number 1. Use tradition to get yourself in the ballpark of where you should be. So the second thing is number 2, use your ears. And that's mostly what I do in those 10-minute tones videos. And we'll do a little bit of it right now. So one quick tip that I have for you is if we just solo this cab here, and I'll bring up the picker. This is just my bass tone, by the way. It's the AC20. And you know what? I'll turn off the delay. Maybe that's a tip. Limit the wet effects afterwards, after the amp, when you're trying to test the cab, because it may add some low end, it may add some color to the sound that you're not going to be able to isolate if you're listening through the wet effects. So I'll turn off the delay, and I just have a shorter plate reverb on here. So, and I think that's okay, just for your listening's sake, if you have headphones on or whatever. So that sounds like this. So one tip I have is open up the picker, and this little icon here, pin. This will keep the window open when you click around, right? So here I can have the window open. I can search for, I've got an AC20, so maybe I search for AC20. Now I see a bunch of results, and I can, now that I have this window pinned, I can just click through and play. And this is really good because when we talk about using your ears, you also can't fully trust your ears because your ears get tired and they have a very short memory. So it's good to compare things back to back, back to back, back to back. So let's listen to, for example, the 121 and the 57, or let's just stick to one type of mic here, and we'll just do the different 121s. Okay, so this is the sound I've got right now. And right now I'm on the second position. I'll switch to the bridge position, so we've got the bridge humbucker here. Man, I actually like that off-axis one. So this is what I mean, like use your ears, try different things, try all of the options there and see what you gravitate towards. What's probably gonna happen is one of them is gonna jump out to you at a particular point in time, and just start with that. Don't bike shed about this. Don't spend 100, minutes just tweaking one little knob, figuring out exactly which cab. Find something that hits the ballpark and go from there and start making music, right? So that's my recommendation to you is use this feature to pin and be able to just sit here and flick through, play the same riff, play just one chord and flick back and forth so that you can hear one right after the other how they compare to each other. And that's really what you're listening for is, does this have more bass, less bass? Does it have more of something I like, less of something I like? And you can kind of just go off of the feeling, like, I like this one more. And sometimes you don't really have to think about it more critically than that. Cool. So I'm going to put it on this one. I think that's what it was on before. Not that that's super important. And so this leads us to the next thing. So maybe let's flip over here. I'll solo the 57. So let's listen to that. And actually, I've already cut out a bunch of high cut. Let me bring the high cut all the way up, and we'll listen to that. I'll bring it slowly down, and you'll hear the difference. That doesn't sound too bad there, but let's play something higher up the neck and see what happens. So maybe getting a little bit ice picky as we get further up the neck. So there's something way up there in the high frequencies that is maybe not pleasant. So what we can do is bring this back and I'll play like the same riff and you can hear the difference. I'll go just a little bit further. This should maybe start to be a more drastic difference. So you can hear there, it starts to get a little bit what I would use the word woofy. Like you kind of, like the amp is in the corner, I put a blanket on it or something like that. I'm starting to lose some of the articulation in the sound. So I don't necessarily like that. This is what I like to do generally, is listen for these points where it feels like something big changed, and then maybe go a little bit beyond it and then bring it back, right? So I'm gonna go to the edge of where it does something I don't want, right? And bring it right back. So I'll bring it back to about 5K. And often I end up setting the high cut about here. And you'll see why when we go look at the frequency response curves in Cab Lab later on. Yeah, so the other thing I would play with is the low cut. So we've got high cut, low cut. This is rolling off low end, so high pass, yeah. And what I look for here, if I bring it all the way down, this will be more obvious with the 121, and again, we'll see why later. I'll bring the low cut all the way down, which is the default, and I'll play something really low. Now, on the lower, when you get down like past the 5th fret here, you're in sort of like very different sonic territory. And your 6th string here is probably a lot thicker than your other strings. And so it has a bassier frequency response. Way oversimplified, but that's one of the big things about your tone is the thickness of the string and the distance from the magnet, blah, 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 blah. We're not going into that. But we're trying to counteract that here because for me, what I'm going for is an even balance across the strings, right? I don't want it to be too ice picky if I'm playing up here, and I don't want it to sound too woofy if I'm way down here, right? Woofy or boomy, right? Now, this cab doesn't have a ton of that, but let's see if we can bring a little bit of it out. And so I'll play some chords down low and I'll bring the low cut up and you can hear the difference. Wow, so you heard when we got up to 200, big difference. For me, I feel like at least in the room, I felt like something changed around 90. So like maybe 80 would be a good cutoff or 100, somewhere around there. I think I had it at 40, so maybe I was going for something a little thicker. Again, maybe my ears were tired when I was listening to that. Maybe I was just in a different mood. These things matter, unfortunately. So yeah, for this playthrough, somewhere around 80 to 100 probably makes sense. I felt like it changed at 90, so I'm going to leave it maybe around 80. So yeah, that gives us something like this. And let's just compare min and maximum really quick. So here is all the way up. So you heard a big difference there. What that means is there's a peak in the frequency response, or that natural roll-off of the cab is within that range somewhere. So kind of what you're trying to find is where is that peak, and then you find a finer adjustment right around that peak to where it feels best to you. And we're really just trying to like I said, have a consistent experience across all the strings as much as possible. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. Knowledge. So what we're going to do here is I've already talked about some of this stuff just with using our ears here, dialing things in. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to snap my fingers and we're going to switch to Cab Lab. Unfortunately, I can't have both of them open at the same time, a bug or something. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to switch to Cab Lab and we're going to be able to see a frequency response curve and compare some different IRs back to back and visually and audio compare them and maybe learn something. So here we go. And we're back. So what we've got here now is I've got Cab Lab loaded up, which you don't need Cab Lab. You can use the cab mixer in the XFX. It's built on the same stuff. But what Cab Lab has that the Cab block doesn't have is this output plot here. And this is a frequency response curve. Without going into too much detail, you can roughly think of this like if the graph is higher, I'm going to get more of those frequencies, right? So you can roughly think of this as like the EQ that the cab is imparting upon the tone. That's a way oversimplification, but you can think of it that way. That's good enough for what we're doing here, trying to dial in some tones. So what is this? We've got 20 hertz down there. I know this is probably hard to read. This says 20 hertz here. This is 20K, 2000, and 200 here are these dividing lines. So this is, I believe, a logarithmic scale. And so it's not linear, but it shows us, we're going to see pretty much the same curve, but it'll be slightly adjusted for each of these cabs. And so let's just compare. What I've got here, let me explain. I've got a bunch of different cabs loaded up on the left, and all I'm going to do is solo each one of them individually. And when I solo them, you'll see the graph change, and then I'll play, and you'll be able to hopefully hear the difference. So what I want to do first is I've got 3 different microphones on this match 25. And these are the first 6 here, these matchless IRs are all from Tone Junkie. So shout out to Tone Junkie, I think they're free ones. And then this one here is an Own Hammer. It's just a V30 that I had lying around. I just wanted something completely different for us to compare. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to compare the 3 microphones on this one speaker, the Match 25, and then we'll compare the Match 25 with the same mics to the Match 30 with the same mic. And then we'll compare how that looks to this Own Hammer 112. So here's the 57. Here's the 121. Sorry, that wasn't exactly the same riff, but hopefully you heard the massive difference that made. And you can see it in the plot. So when I solo the 57 and I flip back and forth between the 121 and the 57, hopefully you can see here that there's a much bigger bump in the low end on the 121. Like there's more low end. There's more going on closer to 20 hertz in the 121 than there is in the 57 IR. And similarly, the 57 has more going on higher up. So if this is 2000, maybe this is like 5K, maybe like the roll off here up top is starting later and is steeper versus the 121 is starting earlier and is more gentle. And then there's a huge drop off here. So those 2 graphs look very different and they sound very different, right? You don't have to really worry about too much about the complex wiggles in the middle, right? We're just kind of ballparking. I'm trying to show you what it looks like to what you're hearing. So that, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that made sense. So now that we've compared the 57 and the 121, let's look at this blend of the 2, which you notice kind of has the characteristics of both. So maybe we get more of what we like from both. So let's listen to that. So that's got a lot of the girth from the 121. It's also got more of the high frequency content from the 57. And in there, and we've kind of mixed them together. Now, maybe it has overall too much bass, but we still like the body that the 121 is giving us. That's where the low cut parameter would come in, where we can maybe tweak that low pass drop off that's happening. Cool, so let's compare the 25 to the 30. That was comparing different microphones of the same speaker. Let's compare different speakers with presumably the same microphones. So let's start with the match 2557, and then I'll switch to the match 3057. So hopefully you're hearing also what I'm hearing, which is also what I'm seeing, is that the 20 match 2557 has a little bit more high frequency content in it. That's what the graph tells us it should have. And at least to my ears, that's what I'm hearing as well. It sounds a little bit brighter. So maybe we should compare the other two. Maybe you'll get the point, right? Let's also just quickly compare the 25-121 to the 30-121. So I'll start with the 25-121. So same microphone, different speaker. Hopefully you can kind of hear like what's the same about that versus the difference between the 57s. And we're starting to isolate like what a microphone does versus what the cabinet does. You can kind of hear that something's kind of the same between the 30-57 and the 31-21, and similarly with the 25. You can kind of start to hear what the speaker sounds like versus what the microphone sounds like. And then you can blend what you like. So let's compare the mixes of the two. I'll start with the 25, and then we'll compare it to the 30. So yeah, subjectively, I like them both. To my ears, the 30 has a little bit of a rounder top end. Like it has a little bit less top end, right? So maybe the 25 would be a little bit more pokey in a mix, which might actually be okay. But it may not be what you're going for, right? So this is why we have options, right? And this is how I think about it when I'm picking different cabs. So let's just compare to something completely different. I'm going to compare this match 30, the mix 121 plus 57, to this Ownhammer V30. And we'll see, you can already see they're way different, right? What should we expect here? I'm not going to say, you think it in your head. and we'll hear what they sound like. So here's again the match 30, 121, 57. Apologies for my tuning. I keep hitting this bar. Anyways, hopefully you heard the massive difference there, and hopefully it also kind of corresponds to this frequency response chart, right? The match 30 there had a lot more low end. Had a lot more beef to the signal. And conversely, the V30 also, in addition to having less low end, had more high frequency content. So brighter, maybe nicer for something that has a lot of delay and reverb, right? Maybe we use that one and don't roll off any low end and we roll off a little bit of high end, something like that, right? These are your tools. Like, think about what the cab is giving you in terms of low end and mid and high, and then tweak that to kind of like a manageable level. That's what we're talking about here. And if this graph is kind of, I don't always use this graph, right? But it's useful to look at to illustrate the point, right? Each speaker, each microphone is going to give you a different characteristic of a frequency response. And you can think of it like a massive, complicated EQ on your amp signal. So the last thing I'll say is be wary of your speakers. And all this means is, like, as we've seen in the Cab Lab exercises, every speaker is very, very different in how it reproduces the sound. And so you have to take that into account in your listening environment, right? Stuff doesn't sound the same, and this intuitively makes sense. Things don't sound the same on your HomePod or your Sonos speaker or your Bluetooth speaker or your headphones or your studio monitors or in your car, right? And so you should take that into account. Now, what I generally do is I've got a pair of Atomic CLRs over here, and they sound great and I love them, but I do tend to make things brighter than they should be when I can listen to them in my headphones, in in-ears. So what I tend to do, I think is a good practice, is use a PA, that's your main thing, have the air moving, be happy, be a happy guitar player making noise, right? And also, at least check your sounds in headphones. So a good pair of studio headphones won't run you too much money. I think it's a good investment to be able to just sanity check, right? Like, playing in your headphones is never going to be enjoyable. It's never going to be enjoyable. Sorry. For hours and hours and hours, right? So, but what I would say is just check the sounds that you're hearing through your PA or whatever speakers you're using. Check those sounds that are intended to be direct sounds in your earphones. And then, presuming that you're eventually going to be playing them on a stage, maybe using in-ears or maybe through some other PA, right? You'll at least have sanity checked that when you get to the gig, it's not going to be a surprise, right? Maybe it's not going to sound as good in your in-ears or your headphones as it does in the room with your preferred PA, but you'll at least know that it sounds good enough, and you won't be surprised about how different it sounds. You might find the same thing as me, that you need to roll off more high end than you think. I don't have really any documentation for this, but as I understand it, a smaller speaker, like the tiny speakers in your in-ears, can actually end up adding some distortion to a guitar signal like this. Very minor and very, very high frequencies, but it can be there. And so the other thing I would say too is, if you haven't checked it and you're in that situation, most in-ear systems have like at least a bass and a treble kind of like knob. Be very liberal with that, right? Sometimes I even run the treble down at like 25%, right? If I haven't checked it and it's just too bright. The sound man's gonna do that anyways. He's gonna compress your signal, he's gonna EQ it, so you can do the same thing for your ears. Anyways, that's all I'll say about that. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I really, really do appreciate it. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And yeah, remember, if it sounds good, it is good.